Aliens can be really scary, and I found some pretty scary stories on Reddit about aliens that we can talk about. These stories are all pretty interesting. Also, guys, I'm trying to hit 100k by the end of the year, as you know, so if we can hit that, I'd be so grateful. So thank you guys. And let's get into the first story. My family saw a UFO. Now we don't speak. My family experienced something I can't explain, and we've stopped talking to each other. I don't know what to do. I don't want to sound crazy. We're normal people. If any of this sounds familiar, please reach out to me. I need to know what's happening to my family. It's hard to know where to begin. I don't know when all this started, but it hasn't stopped. I live with my wife and 2 college-age daughters. I'm a private chef. My wife is a teacher. We live in a suburb outside a coastal US city in an 80s era planned community where every house and street feels like a mirror image. Crisp lawns, HOAs, everyone knows everyone. The people are a little bland, but we have a yard and a pool, and we can pay for groceries, and we can barely afford to send our kids to college out of state. We were lucky, I thought. My first experience with the supernatural was last spring. Okay, you're really gonna hate this one, Sarah said. It was Monday, my Saturday, and I was grilling vegetables by the pool. My eldest daughter, a born trickster, sat on the least broken pool chair, bombarding me with the most willfully ignorant pop music she could find, or terrible cooking videos, or clips of classic cars refurbished with electric motors. Anything to get a reaction out of her poor Gen X dad. Please no. How about the guy who makes things out of chocolate? I countered, hoping for a compromise. I'm looking for the Kings game you went to in '06 where they lost 1-10, Sarah jabbed. I'm burning your food on purpose, I quipped. Wait, Sarah said, suddenly still. Whatever this thing is, whatever these things are, my wife and daughters feel it before I do. I don't know if they're more sensitive to it or what, but they always know something is there before me. Call it women's intuition. What's wrong? As I said it, I remember it got very quiet. Like the volume for the outside world turned all the way down. The birds, the traffic, and the white noise of suburbia went silent. I couldn't even hear the sizzle of the vegetables cooking 2 feet in front of me. The lack of sound didn't bother me, however, because I saw something in the sky. A disc. I didn't want to see a disc, but I saw a disc. It was made of metal, perfectly smooth, no rivets, no seams, no wings, no exhaust. A perfectly formed metal disc, 15 feet wide, like 2 contact lenses stuck together, just sitting there. There were lights, big ones, bright in the sun, even in the middle of the day, moving all around it. I remember thinking, really? Part of me was exasperated at how, well, dumb it looked. Like an old movie model. Only somehow I knew it was real and I was being watched. And then I felt the fear. If you ask me, I think the craft makes people feel it. I don't know. I know it sounds crazy. It's like a madness. It fills you up. Cold, just pure terror. As soon as your eyes see a craft, in a few seconds, your mind blanks and you feel only the fear of the thing in front of you. The disc-shaped ones and the triangle-shaped ones, they always seem to broadcast the fear. I never felt panic like that. I know how to deal with it a little easier now, but back then, I wanted to put my daughter in the car and drive as far away from this thing as possible. Only I was completely frozen. I couldn't move and I couldn't speak. I could only move my eyes. And even that took tremendous effort. I struggled to look in my daughter's direction and saw she was equally paralyzed. Her pupils turned to me, then back to the craft. We did that for a few seconds, trying to process what was happening, looking to the disc, to each other and back. It was agony. And then the disc was gone. I was looking right at it. It didn't fly away. It didn't zoom off at incredible speeds. It was like it stopped existing while I was staring at it. When it was gone, I could move and I could breathe, and my daughter started crying. And I comforted her, and we swore and shook. What the hell was that? Are you okay? I remember reaching for my phone, but it was dead. Sarah's phone was dead too. We went inside to charge them, still in a daze. Your face is really red, said Sarah, concerned. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. She was right. My face was burned, like a sunburn. I wear sunblock every day and often work long hours in the sun. I never get sunburned. I'll get you some aloe, Sarah said, retreating into the downstairs bathroom. I glanced at the oven clock. It was 3 hours later than I expected. 3 hours, I muttered. We were only outside for a few minutes, right? Sarah's eyes widened in realization. What happened to us? Sarah said softly. We were missing time. I don't know where that time went. I don't know what happened during that time. Time feels weird around these things. It's hard to describe. We didn't talk much for a while. We just kind of sat in the living room scrolling our phones. The evening darkened. I remember thinking I wanted to say something, but I didn't know what. My wife Lauren and our youngest daughter Danny returning home from work broke us out of our malaise. A UFO burned your face? Lauren said, incredulous. Lauren was always funny, even when she wasn't trying to be. I won't lie, it sounded dumb. I tried to think of how to word it better. I saw it too. It was really weird, Sarah said, seriously. You sure you weren't standing too close to the grill again? Danny teased. Her pants were covered in flour and oil, her hair pulled back. Danny worked at a restaurant, despite my objections. You're supposed to make the food in the restaurant, not on your outfit. I teased back. Danny smirked. She liked kitchen talk, and she was a lot like me in that way. I don't understand. Did you provoke them? Why did they come all the way from space just to burn you? Lauren asked, spreading student tests in the dining dining room table. Did it look like one of the ones we saw when we were kids? Danny asked Sarah. No, this was different. It was a different shape, Sarah said, shaking her head. What are you talking about? Which ones? I asked. Do you remember the night we saw the blue elf? Danny asked. Memories of Sarah and Danny as kids flooded my brain. One night, a brilliant blue light in the sky. Sarah and Danny ran into our room to hide, the feeling of someone watching. The memory filled me with dread. Feeling uncomfortable, I tried to change the subject. I don't want to cook tonight. Let's order out. What should we get? I said, presenting a distraction. We ate dinner as a family that night. We talked about normal things. I tried to seem unbothered, but I was obsessively turning over the siding of the disc in my mind. What was that? Why couldn't we move? The feeling stayed with me long after the meal had ended and the dishes were done. I remember that was our last normal dinner. I wish I'd made more of an effort that night. We'll never be the same family we were then. I guess before I tell you about that night, I should explain what an orb is. An orb is a kind of floating sphere. It looks like a blue basketball filled with spaghetti-looking strands of something. It has a mind, I think. I don't know what these things are. From what I can tell, they're unknowable. They will harm you. If you see an orb, my advice is to run. They can move through walls. The first night with the orbs changed all of our lives forever. We stopped talking after that night. I don't know if I can write it down in detail yet. Even this was hard. I read something recently. Scientists have communicated with apes via sign language since the 1960s, and all that time, apes have never asked a question. Maybe they can't conceive what a question is. Their mind just can't form the reasoning to understand how to think of one. I think that's what it's like when we see these things, these orbs or discs or whatever. Like we're seeing something we can't comprehend. I don't think we think about aliens the right way. They're not from another planet. They're from somewhere else entirely. Something has happened to my family. Something happened and we're still dealing with it and I don't know what to do. I'm afraid to tell people. We're afraid to talk about it with each other. I'm not even sure if anyone will read this. The world needs to know what's out there, what my family experienced. My family can't be the first. There must be others. If you're still with me after all these ramblings, thank you. The next part will not be easy to write, but you deserve to know the truth about what the orbs did to us, what they're capable of. For now, I present to you this information. I do not think we live in a completely material world. There are supernatural forces all around us, and most of them are unkind. Be careful with how you think and what you think of. Lee. That was a pretty good story, guys. This one I really liked. If you guys want to hear the part 2 whenever it comes out, it's not out yet, but whenever it comes out, if you want to hear more about the orbs, then let me know in the comments and I'll try to cover that one next. But anyways, let's get into the next story. NASA is covering up proof of alien life. I've worked for NASA for 12 years, and I'm finally ready to tell someone. No, I have to tell someone before it's too late for everyone. It all began a few years ago. We were working on a project called the AIE program. The goal of the AIE program was publicly to test a device that would monitor the chemical makeup of cosmic dust in our solar system, but nothing could be further from the truth. I was placed in the team that was responsible for experimentation. The instructions we received were unreasonably vague, especially for a project so heavily funded. All that we were told was that the device was intended to foster interstellar communication. Our project supervisor was a man named Dr. Adrian Melrose. He was tall and skinny, with long black hair that was so dark it seemed to reflect his surroundings. His face was gaunt, and he had deep wrinkles around his mouth. He spoke with a dignified voice, and even though I felt intimidated by his appearance, I couldn't help but be impressed by his eloquence. After a short brief, we were presented with the device and we were told to begin experimentation. It turned out this involved using electromagnetic frequencies to transmit signals across the observable universe. I won't go into too much detail about the science behind it, but we would essentially use the device to send radio waves out into space. Basically, it was the cosmic equivalent of throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping that something would pick up the signal. God, I wish it hadn't. The thing about the device is that it was not only the most powerful EM wave transmitter we had ever developed, but also the most powerful receiver. This double function was what would hopefully allow us to establish a line of communication. I think that this was the point I began to wonder. A line of communication to who? Who were we hoping to reach? The brief had only mentioned establishing communication, but in reality, we had no idea if that would ever happen, and the chances were exceedingly slim. Or so I thought. I can't explain how strange it feels to sit here and write this down, to admit the truth as I know it. But there are people whose lives depend on me telling them. Even now, I don't want to believe my own words because they make me sound insane. I was the second last person to leave the lab every night, always making sure that all the equipment was off and secured before even saying goodbye to Dr. Melrose. I don't think I ever saw him leave that lab. On one particular evening, I was going through my regular routine of securing equipment while Dr. Melrose watched carefully. I said goodbye goodbye and turned to leave when I felt a bony hand on my shoulder. I turned around to see him staring at me with the most panicked eyes I've ever seen. I'll never forget what he said to me. "Don't answer the call," Dr. Melrose uttered in a low, foreboding tone. I instinctively pulled away from his grasp and stared in disbelief, not sure what to say to this. I muttered some sort of goodbye and rushed out as he stood quietly and stared at me with a piercing gaze. Traffic interrupted my strict morning routine, and I arrived at work late, much to the disapproval of my senior researchers. However, the frustration was lost amid the celebration. We'd received a response. I should have been excited. I should have been proud, but all I could feel was dread. What does it say?" I asked anxiously. "We don't know yet. It's some kind of weird frequency that we can't understand," one of the researchers replied. Dr. Melrose stayed silent and in the corner, the same intimidating aura as always. I couldn't help but glance at him to see how he was taking the news, but he just avoided my gaze and looked away. The next few months, we all worked towards decoding the transmission. Everyone was in pretty high spirits following the discovery, with the exception of Melrose and I, who looked on with trepidation. With every day that we came closer to decoding the message, my dread grew and grew in the pit of my stomach. And then the day came. If there's one thing I'd take back in my life, it would be coming into work that day. Every instinct told me not to. Every nerve burned with the desire to stay as far away from that damned lab as possible. But I went, and I regret it every single day. It was Marcus Beckett that made the discovery. He was a young guy, the youngest and least experienced on the team. He had messy brown hair and freckles and a shaky voice. Despite how he seemed though, he was brilliant. And when he called all of us in to share what he had found, he had the biggest grin I'd seen from him in 2 years of work. The group crowded around the computer to listen. I watched in horror as the bright smiles of my fellow researchers dropped into grimaces teeming with regret. The translated message played as follows: "Evacuate, they are among you. Evacuate, they are among you. Evacuate, they are among you." The robotic voice's message played over and over until Dr. Melrose calmly stepped over to the laptop, closed the lid as we all stood around in shock. "This didn't happen," he declared. Dr. Melrose walked away, clutching the laptop. After that, the AIE program was cancelled. The official story was that the transmission came from a burst of cosmic energy, and that the project was no longer worth funding. All the researchers involved were given NDA contracts and let go from their positions. Nobody complained about the termination. I think we all realized that ignorance is bliss, and we wanted nothing more to do with whatever had replied. I still don't know what Dr. Melrose meant when he told me not to answer, and I doubt I ever will. For 12 years, I've kept quiet, but I realized that the world needs to know that something is among us. After writing this, I don't think I'll be around long enough to make an update, but it's worth it if it means the world knows the truth. This one was pretty scary. This one kind of reminded me of anime in a way, if that makes sense to you guys. It gave anime vibes. Now, this next one is a really long one. You can see how long the video is, and the rest of this video is only one more story, but it's a really good one, so stick around for the whole thing. I don't know who returned from space, but they weren't the NASA astronauts we sent. You may think you know the space agency, but you don't. NASA is not the sum of its publicly presented parts. I'm not simply talking about classified research and development. I'm talking about the dozens of space programs veiled from prying eyes. Programs hidden from many folk within the company. And when I was finally offered the privilege of peering behind the curtain, I found myself at the eye of an unprecedented storm. A disaster beyond the bounds of earthly horror, the G1 mission. Since the climax of the space race, a consensus has grown, a prevailing belief that NASA has abandoned the final frontier. It is, however, an absurd notion that the brightest minds of this agency no longer care about space's mysteries. The truth is that our best scientists decided decades ago to shield humanity from the hellish things we've uncovered, things lying in the pits of space that no light reaches. NASA projects featured in the media have low stakes. Even the International Space Station sits at the foot of this organization's priorities. Significant expeditions are classified. The ones intended to catapult humanity towards the stars, for instance. The ones using spacecraft beyond what the average person deems possible with human technology. We are capable of things that would leave you awestruck. We are capable of things that would leave you cold. The GE-1 spacecraft launched on Wednesday, 25th January 2023. It sailed beyond our solar system, pursuing a slow slow signal that was coursing through the outer reaches of the Milky Way. Not an intelligible transmission, but a frequency that intrigued us nonetheless. A frequency named 784A. Hysteria swept the company on the date of the signal's first interception, Saturday 29th, October 2022. Given 784A's ever-moving source, the frequency sparked feverish intrigue. Regarding the nature of the mysterious moving signal, there seemed to be a different hypothesis from every NASA employee with clearance. It was truly an exhilarating time, and things reached a fever pitch when the GE-1 craft launched a few months later. Employees weren't eating or sleeping. They spent their waking hours sharing ideas about the mysterious transmission from space. A circuit board of explanations that finally overloaded on Thursday, the 2nd February 2023, the day on which the GE-1 stopped responding to NASA. 1 week later, on Thursday the 9th February, the signal from the spacecraft returned. Commander Irwin, this is Mission Control. Dr. Parker, the head of the project, announced. Mission Control to GE-1. Do you copy? Roger, Mission Control. Commander Tim Irwin responded. We've been trying to reach you. We lost contact with GE-1 7 days ago, Commander. What happened? What is your status? Dr. Parker asked. All systems are fine, Mission Control, Irwin replied. Dr. Parker seemed flustered by the commander's nonchalant demeanor. The project leader clawed at his gray, thinning hair with tense fingers. The old man seemed to be carefully considering his next utterance. 7 days without contact, Commander. 7. GE-1 disappeared at our end. Do you have a status report? Anything which might explain why we were unable to communicate with one another? Parker asked. Nothing, Mission Control, Irwin blankly replied. As for 784A, we reached the transmission point of the signal. There is nothing to be found. We've collected as much data as possible, requesting clearance to return home. There were several minutes of nervous mumbling from various scientists and board members. Dr. Parker looked broken beyond a measure by the time he leaned forwards, heavy breath beating against the microphone. He was trembling with a mixture of rage and confusion. Roger, Commander Irwin, you have clearance to come home, Parker croaked. On a vessel traversing space at an unfathomable pace, the astronauts returned home. The craft silently landed at an unofficial NASA site on Wednesday, 15th February 2023. The GE-1 crew emerged, greeted by a small, applauding crowd. Tim Irwin, Gianna Danes, Matthias Olsen. Those were the 3 astronauts who supposedly emerged from the spacecraft, and at first, we had no reason to believe anything else. We recognized the 3 faces, the 3 voices, the 3 brilliant minds. However, it did not take long for slight oddities to slip through the cracks. I overheard something perplexing whilst Tim Irwin spoke to his wife, Melissa Irwin, in the break room. I love you, Melody, the astronaut said. Melissa frowned, smiling awkwardly. Melody? Who is Melody? I didn't intend to eavesdrop. I'd been helping myself to a drink. Still, I slowed down when I heard that. Melissa was clearly teasing her exhausted husband, but there was a slight tinge of uncertainty in her voice. And I'll admit that I was a little too nosy. I pretended to weigh up 2 different drinks before I made my way out of the room. As a result, I managed to catch the tail end of the commander's strange fumble. Irwin cleared his throat. I'm sorry, honey. I forgot my wife's name? Melissa laughed, finishing his sentence. No worries, honey. It's Melissa, by the way, just to let you know. I didn't realize I had to worry about you finding another woman in space. I know your name, Tim, icily sliced. I froze, halfway out the door, as Melissa replied with a timid voice. Sorry, sweetie. I know. I was only joking, she assured. Your head must be all over the place. You look like you need a good rest. I laughed to myself once I was out of earshot, but I felt the same as Melissa. Something was slightly uneasy about Tim's disposition. It wasn't simply a sleep-deprived brain. I knew that, and she knew that. Commander's voice changed when his wife confronted him. It didn't sound like an astronaut any longer. I didn't know Tim extremely well, but I knew he was different. Whatever the case, I would have forgotten about the entire thing, dismissing my gut feeling as the result of a nerve-wracking week or two. Everyone had been unsettled since GE-1 lost its signal. We were still recovering from the stress of those 7 awful days without any communication from the spacecraft. There was one other thing worth mentioning from the day of GE-1's return. One of my coworkers claimed to find Gianna Danes standing alone in a corner, staring at a bathroom door, not entering, not moving. Sleep deprivation, I thought again. 1 year later, that explanation no longer sufficed. On Wednesday, 31st January 2024, an unidentified object entered Earth's atmosphere, tumbling into the Pacific Ocean. A catastrophe that was only brought to NASA's attention because the object in question utilized advanced cloaking technology, though it did not broadcast a signal. It was a government satellite that detected the craft, and when specialists identified that they had detected technology used by Dozen Minus, our primary government contractor, NASA immediately sent a recovery team to the ocean site. site. That was as much as I knew until Dr. Parker knocked on my door. "I'd appreciate your input," he said. "Pardon?" I replied, fearing for a moment that I'd have to join the exploration team. "You're one of only 24 people who were involved with the GE1 project," Parker explained, as if that were enough information. "I don't understand. That project ended a year ago," I said. Dr. Parker's brow furrowed. "Please come with me, Dr. Odell." And then, after following the man to the control room, I learned something which my brain, usually eager to embrace the unknown, wanted so desperately to unlearn. On the ocean floor, thousands of feet below the water's surface, NASA found the GE1 spacecraft. "What?" I gasped. "We don't know," Dr. Parker replied. "I need your help, though." "Why?" I weakly asked. "I don't understand any of this. The GE1 is sitting in a hangar, isn't it?" "Yes," Dr. Parker nodded. "But it's also sitting at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, 3,000 miles off the East Coast." My face whitened and the man nodded. "Take your time to process that," he said. "I'm still working on wrapping my head around it." After a minute or so, I finally summoned a question that I didn't find utterly foolish or uneducated. "Is the exact same spacecraft identical in every way?" I asked. The project leader sighed. "Well, yes and no." "Why am I here, Dr. Parker?" I asked. "The recovery team has not explored the craft yet," the man replied, "but we have conducted a preliminary exploration with an unmanned vessel, UV-7. Movement was detected within the craft." "Christ," I gasped. Parker continued. "It's unsettling. The room is divided. Some specialists think that a living organism might be down there, but others think that it may have been a dislodged piece of equipment. The UV-7 didn't transmit any biological information. Anyway, that's why I wanted to bring you into the room. You're one of this organization's leading biologists, after all." I scoffed. "I specialize in cell and molecular biology. This is, well, what is this? What have we even found here?" "Nothing," Parker said. "That's my verdict, but Dr. Long disagrees. I mentioned your name to them, and I'm hoping you'll help me." "How?" I asked. "By proving what the UV-7 has already told us," he answered. "Whatever moved down there, it wasn't living. It wasn't organic in nature, unless a fish happened to... No, it couldn't have been. As I said, the UV-7 would have detected a biological signal." I agreed to offer my opinion. I shouldn't have done so, but I did. It would have been easy to ask Dr. Parker to choose someone else, give someone else clearance. I wasn't exactly emotionally invested in the GE1 program. It had been a year since the astronaut supposedly returned, and we'd found nothing at the source of the 784A frequency. Since then, I'd moved on to bigger and better things. Of course, everything changed when Parker revealed that an identical version of the GE1 spacecraft existed at the bottom of the ocean. It was a discovery far beyond anything I'd experienced during 13 years at NASA. I needed an answer to the unknown. 2 hours later, with no more than 20 people in the control room, we watched live footage of the submarines dive towards the GE1 crash site. The mission was a joint venture between NASA and a privately contracted company, with all participating crew members legally bound to an NDA. After all, they were about to explore a spacecraft which, in the public realm, did not exist. After the initial flurry of breathtaking aquatic species, it took another 2 torturous hours for the video feed to display anything other than blackness. The vessel descended into the depths of the ocean, the part that light didn't reach. I thought about its similarity to space. I found it ridiculous to think about the fact that we have ignored a frontier on our own planet before exploring the one beyond it. So much of the ocean remained unexplored. Eventually, the contractors found the wreckage, and 2 divers, each fitted with a camera, left the submarine to explore the vessel. When they rounded the battered nose of the spacecraft, Mission Control fell silent. We all saw it at the same time. The bold letters printed on the crumpled wreckage of the sunken craft, which was half buried in the black seabed, GE1. Hearing about the discovery was one thing. Seeing it on a gargantuan screen was something else. Dr. Parker was no liar. I knew that, but I still didn't believe him until I saw the footage for myself. "Breaching the airlock now," the lead diver, Barton, announced. Disturbed water swirled into a stream of bubbles, clouding the lens of Barton's camera, as he used a piece of specialized drilling equipment. It was a large and arduous process, during which Mission Control only had a limited view of the spectacle through the camera of Lee, the second driver. "That'll do it," Barton's colleague said. The bubbles started to disperse as the drill ceased, and we watched the 2 drivers break the airlock's mechanism before pulling the hatch towards them. They revealed a void within the opening, and the lights on their headsets did very little to illuminate the innards of the craft. I sensed that the 2 men were apprehensive about entering the wreckage. They likely knew very little about NASA's GE1 program. That, in the end, was for the best. We all longed for that privilege. "Entering the vehicle," Barton uneasily said. The lead diver swam toward the opening, followed a couple of seconds later by Lee, who may well have been on the verge of turning and retreating into the submarine. The split screen revealed 2 pieces of footage, barely different in perspective. 2 views of the same bleak, water-filled tunnel. The entrance to a vessel that had once traversed space, only to meet its end in a watery grave. Our broadcasting clear footage?" Lee asked. "Yes," Dr. Parker responded. "If you follow the main hallway, you'll reach GE-1's flight deck." "Not seeing any obstructions," Barton said. "Should be manageable." The pair continued to swim through the hallway of the craft, which, as Barton had noted, was remarkably intact. None of the carnage and chaos we expected to find. Then again, we shouldn't have been surprised. There were minimal tears in the exterior of the craft. Given the level of investment placed into developing a vessel far beyond mankind's perceived capabilities, it seemed plausible that the craft had mostly survived both the dangerous re-entry and a high-speed collision with the water. What did not seem plausible was Parker's explanation that we were looking at a carbon copy of an existing spacecraft, one which I'd watched land on Earth a year earlier. I had no reason to believe that everybody in the room had to be lying to me, but something in my brain refused to compute such an impossibility. I wouldn't have ever believed Dr. Parker, even if I'd gone to the hangar and physically seen the craft in person before swimming to the bottom of the ocean of US Twin. Even after everything I've just seen, I still try hard not to believe any of it. "Oh, Jesus," Barton cried. It only took a second for the camera to reveal what the driver had seen. The hellish scene that had sparked such a haunted response, and I unleashed a similar yelp of terror. We all recoiled fearfully, in fact. I suppose none of us had hypothesized what we might find in the wreckage, even when the debate about movement and biological signatures had raged. There was no joyous hysteria. This was not like those early days of the GE-1 project. Nobody seemed exuberant to find 3 floating spacesuits at the front of the spacecraft. Spacesuits that were not empty. Spacesuits that were surprisingly intact. It had taken roughly a day or so since the GE-1 crash for the divers to breach the vessel. 24 hours for the bodies to decompose underwater. The skin of each astronaut was discolored and wounded with haunting razor-thin gashes, but their gaunt faces were unmistakable. 2 men and 1 woman, each wearing a scream to the grave, were the 3 astronauts who had returned to Earth 1 year earlier. Worst of all was the corpse of Commander Tim Irwin. The upper half of his helmet and the head within had been cleanly severed above his gaping mouth. That explained the rotten nature of his remaining lower half, in comparison to Diane's and Olsen's, who were each encased in a suit without oxygen. The ship's oxygen would have lasted at least a month or so, resulting in partial decay of Irwin's remaining face, exposed by the savagely sawn helmet. The lower half of his face bore holes in the cheeks, revealing teeth behind. One scientist murmured that the 3 scientists may have died long before impact. Within a sealed spacesuit lacking oxygen, the decomposition process would have been slowed. Of course, that only raised more terrified questions. One in particular played on my mind. Why were the astronauts wearing suits inside the spacecraft? A technical engineer gave a probable explanation for the ship's return. The GE-1 was programmed with a homing initiative. In the event of life loss, or 24 hours without manual piloting, the craft's motherboard was programmed to assume automatic control of the GE-1 and steer it back to Earth. The re-entry might have failed because the ship was damaged. That might also explain why we didn't receive a signal from its transmitter. Honestly, it's a miracle that the GE-1 made it back to Earth at all, the engineer said. We'll know more when we look at the ship's log, another engineer added. Dr. Parker sighed. Barton, we have to get out of here, Lee yelled, shouting over Dr. Parker. I didn't sign up for this. Look, we did the dive, you've seen what you needed to see. I understand that this is a terrible situation, Parker continued. You were, however, briefed. You signed a contract, Mr. Lee. The nature of the expedition was made clear to you, and we don't have all the information that we need. We need you to recover as much of the ship's data as possible. Do you have the drive? Yes, Barton murmured, dazed with the 3 floating corpses. Right, Parker replied. You should see the socket on the right-hand side. The Leaf divers swam towards the main console, searching anxiously with the navigational assistance of every expert in the room. When he finally inserted the drive into the designated socket, a red light flickered beside it. What does that mean? Barton said. You were right, Ian, one of the technical engineers said to his colleague. It's not good, Mr. Barton. It means that some of the ship's log files are corrupted. All of them? Dr. Parker asked. The engineer rubbed his chin. Well, if there had been no light at all, that would have been a total loss. So there's still hope. It'll be the water damage, no doubt about that. Just leave the drive in the socket, Mr. Barton. Let it run. When the light turns off, that means data transfer has finished. Meanwhile, Lee was scanning the ship with equipment for detecting organic matter. I was standing by, waiting for the diver's device to detect some sign of life, something that would warrant me being in the room, but there was nothing. Not even any sign of the movement that the UV-7 had detected. I was the uncomfortable biologist in the corner. Only there, it seemed, to endure the horror alongside everyone else. Something that did intrigue Mission Control, however, was Lee's discovery of floating glass shards in Dane's laboratory. Most people wouldn't pay attention to suspended glass fragments in an underwater wreckage. The divers certainly didn't understand the commotion from the scientists, and neither did I. But Lee indulged Dr. Parker when he was instructed to collect a sample. It's just broken glass, I naively thought, frowning. 10 minutes later, when the data transfer completed, Barton recovered the drive, and the 2 divers were beyond happy to receive the go-ahead from Dr. Parker to leave the site. The men returned to the submarine, the transmission ended, and everybody in the mission control room dispersed. I didn't sleep that night, of course. No sane person would manage to get a good night's sleep after such an awful discovery. When I went into work that morning, I hadn't expected to see video footage of 3 dead astronauts. More terrifying than that, I hadn't expected to see footage of 3 corpses who I'd seen return to Earth alive and well. Earl? Dr. Parker half barked. I was sitting in my office, boring into the wall with a 1,000-yard stare. It took the man 3 attempts to catch my attention. Using my first name had triggered something in my brain, taking me out of myself for a moment, reminded me that this was all real. No matter how hard I tried to dissociate and detach myself, I was excruciatingly intertwined with the horror. Dr. Parker, I replied, unable to say anything else. I'm afraid I have to ask you once again to come with me, the man said, seeming far paler than usual. We just reviewed the data from the GE-1 wreckage. What did you find? I whispered, voice breaking. Parker sighed. If you come to my office, you'll see. I really need your opinion. That seemed like a lie to me. Dr. Parker had been talking about the importance of my opinion as a biologist since the start of the GE-1 program. In the end, I'd simply been a limp, lifeless limb. Hardly even a backup appendage, just some excess fat that somebody had forgotten to trim. As it would transpire, however, Dr. Parker had finally found something that required my input. Out of 102 audio files on the drive, only 2 were uncorrupted. 2 recordings from Commander Tim Irwin. Within those recordings, Dr. Parker heard something he didn't understand. Heard many things he didn't understand. Unfortunately, I scarcely understood the recordings either. What little I did understand, however, horrified me, and I saw that coming. It was foreshadowed by the project leader, by his haunted eyes. The board need to know whether they found something alien in nature, Dr. Odell. I still don't think it's not organic. I don't believe that. They won't listen to me, Dr. Parker said, but listen to you. I could tell that the man no longer believed his own words. He wanted me to prove him wrong. File 86. This is Commander Tim Irwin. I'm recording this message at 1440 on Thursday, the 2nd February 2023, Greenwich Mean Time. Since 12:15 today, we have been unable to contact Mission Control. Olsen has not pinpointed any malfunction, so we hope that all remains well back home. The 3 of us are contemplating the possibility that the issue with our broadcasting signal stems from what we have discovered, the source of the 784A frequency. We found it, and given what we've experienced over the past 2 hours, I believe it to be vital for me to record our findings in the absence of any communication from Dr. Parker. At roughly 12:35, shortly after losing contact with home, we finally saw a physical manifestation of the frequency that we've been hunting for 8 days. We were starting to think there'd be nothing there. We'd been eyeing blackness for hours, believing that the transmission had no visible source. It was when we neared a mile or less from the signal source that we finally saw something tangible. I'm still struggling to describe our discovery. Well, at first, we didn't know how to put it into words. Now, however, I suppose I'd say that we are pursuing an ever-moving belt of glass shards. Yes, glass shards. You heard me correctly. Thousands of small, glass-like fragments are hurtling through the cosmos. Jagged pieces of some unknown material. No signs of biological life. No sign of foreign technology, just a near-transparent substance with no technological or organic nature, somehow transmitting the 784A frequency. That revelation might disappoint some people back home, those hoping for signs of alien life. Still, I know that Dr. Parker and other minds behind this mission will be extremely fascinated by this discovery. At 12:55, after a brief preparation period, we used the B-1 craft to retrieve a sample of glass from the moving belt. I understand that, though we were cleared to use the equipment without approval, Dr. Parker may be a little disheartened. I know he wanted to experience this with us. I just hope he'll understand. We didn't want to wait for the line of communication to reopen. After all, we didn't know whether we'd have another opportunity. We had no way of knowing how the mysterious belt of glass would react to our presence, even though GE-1 wasn't picking up organic or electronic signals. Diane keeps talking about the possibility of something sentient lurking in the glass. Until we detect something organic, I doubt that. The belt was, and still is, moving at a rather glacial pace of roughly 6,000 miles per hour. We will have no trouble pursuing it in the GE-1. As I speak, we are trundling alongside the glass stream at a crawl. It stretches for hundreds of miles. Who knows how many shards are contained within the stream. With regards to recovering glass pieces from the belt, the B-1 craft suffered catastrophic damage, which intrigued us. No form of glass on Earth would be powerful enough, even at such a speed, to tear through the B-1's reinforced hull. That only confirmed what we already knew. This isn't glass. It isn't anything we understand. Upon realizing that, we realized that we had to retrieve a sample, regardless of the damage to B-1. The small craft had managed to collect a meager handful of passing shards, but that was enough. We didn't want to push our luck, so we brought it back within a matter of minutes. I'll send the data logs over as soon as the communication is fixed. You'll see what I mean. The Minister vessel was almost obliterated by the belt, and we didn't want to lose an opportunity to claim at least something. At 13:20, Dr. Gianna Diane examined the 7 shards, recovered by by the B1 craft in her laboratory. She instructed Olsen and I to wear protective gear before joining her, as she had no idea exactly what we'd found. We giddily watched Diane conduct her tests. She was giddy too, in all honesty, though she attempted to maintain a professional composure. We're aware, whatever we've retrieved, that it is unlike anything humanity has seen before. Dr. Diane's confirmed around 1420 what we'd seen in GE1's data. The shards do not contain organic matter. Each piece is composed of a raw material not present on Earth or any other planet we've ever explored. Shortly before I started this recording, however, Olsen became a little jittery. He told Diane and me that he saw one of the shards enlarge, or at least move in some form. It was likely a trick of the lighting, of course. Diane took him seriously, but she found no evidence of any change in the material. I suggested that moving forward, we set up cameras to record the laboratory. Diane and Olsen agreed. That'll ensure we don't miss anything. I'll send everything to mission control as soon as Olsen has figured out how to fix the transmitter, though he assures me that it remains unbroken. Bizarre. Anyway, interference from the 784A frequency seems to be the most likely explanation, but we're still unsure. I will continue to log daily updates. For now, the three of us need to get some rest. It's been a historic day, but we're shattered. None of us have slept in over a day. This is Commander Tim Irwin, audio file 86, terminating recording at 1450. I need you to brace yourself, Dr. Parker said. I snapped back into reality, having been fully immersed in the wonder of the crew's discovery. Much like Commander Irwin, I'd almost forgotten the gravity of the situation, forgotten the terror that NASA had found at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. Brace myself for what? The next audio file? I said. Dr. Parker nodded. We just listened to 86. The only other uncorrupted recording is 99. So we're missing 12 files in between? I asked. Yes, he answered. And 3 files after 99. The board doesn't care about the first 85 audio files. The ones before we lost contact with GE1. Meaningless updates that would likely mirror whatever Commander Irwin was telling Mission Control on a daily basis. But the audio recordings from 86 to 102 detail whatever happened after the vessel went dark. Those are, perhaps, the most valuable pieces of data that this organization currently possesses. Right. Is file 99 useful? I asked. The doctor's lip quivered as he hovered his unsteady index finger over the mouse, contemplating whether to inflict such horror upon me. I wish he hadn't. Useful. That's an interesting word. I don't know, Dr. Odell. It tells one horrifying part of a story that we don't understand. Parker croaked before clicking. File 99. This is Irwin. 99. File 99. Since the last few recordings, things have... It's all over. And things were already terrible. This must be my 5th recording today. Sorry for the backlog of files for you to... Oh, who cares? Why am I apologizing to anyone? Nobody's there. Nobody will ever be there. I'll be lost to space and... Well, I hope somebody hears it. There's the protocol after all. Their term protocol. I'm no engineer, but I remember Olsen talking about it. If GE1 makes it back to Earth, I hope these recordings make sense to you, whoever's listening. None of this makes sense to me, and it's even worse now that Diane's is gone. She died at, I don't know, 2210, perhaps? It's Tuesday the 7th, February, 2240. I'm the only surviving member of the GE1 crew. You know how it happened. I just want her family to know that I tried to save her. Oh god. This all started with a reckless endeavor. We should have turned around when we saw the vessel outside the window. It's still there. I'm looking at it now. GE1, an identical version of our spacecraft, eyeballing me from the belt, impervious to the racing current of glass. You know what? I'd like to amend my statement. We should have turned around as soon as we lost contact with Mission Control. This was written on the wall. Everything about the belt was wrong. We knew it, but we were drooling from our mouths like apes. Olsen's idea was smart. It was smart. It just wasn't enough. We should have thought about B1. Thought about how the glass tore through it. Olsen promised, however, that this would be different. The belt was moving so quickly after all. He said the shards weren't as dangerous outside the belt. We wanted to believe him. Maybe I still want to believe him. I'm wearing my suit even though I know it didn't save him. And it didn't save Diane's either. I spent most of the day trying to stop the bleeding, but it was awful. You heard it. You don't need me to tell you. I still hear her words ringing in my ears. The things she described, the way it cut into her skin and then disappeared. The glass disappeared after hacking her face to pieces. It was so methodical and quick. So eerily quick, but not in a merciful way. Her dying scream will never leave my mind. Neither will the sight of that sharp shard, unbound by the laws of physics, slicing her face with clean, swift motions. A weapon wielded by an unseen force. I've locked the lab. That won't be enough, will it? It wasn't enough to stop. Oh, there it goes. That's why I wanted to record this. I keep seeing something in the copied version of the GE1 spacecraft, gliding 100 yards from the real one. I kept seeing movement behind the windows. Oh God. No, there's no God. Not in the... I see them so clearly now, but they're dead. Olsen and Diane's are dead. Their bodies are sitting in the control room. I'm looking at them, and I'm also there across the way, surveying me from the flight deck of the copied craft. What is happening? What is this? I don't. They won't stop looking at me. They won't stop. I want to turn around. I want to stop following the belt. I wanted to abandon the mission for days, but Diane made a good point. After Olsen passed, class, she said that we shouldn't head back with the shards on board. We were just too frightened to go near the shards after he died. Without Diane's, I don't see myself solving this. I just have to soldier onwards, keep tracking things, keep moving. I'll record an update tomorrow, but I won't abandon this mission. Not until I talk to somebody from Mission Control. Whatever material we found, I don't think I should come home unless I get rid of it. So wait, do you hear that? That's what I heard before when it happened to Diane's, when the glass moved, changed into something, I don't know, it looked like liquid, like a thin trail of water with a slight sheen. It crawled across the walls before climbing her suit and somehow slithering beneath the visor. I don't know how it entered, but then it started solidifying. She was running around, screaming, wrestling with her own helmet. Give me a second, I need to check the lab. Yes, there are fewer pieces of glass. That's the other thing. 4. There are only 4 shards. We collected 7 from the belt. There were definitely 7. Then 6, after the mirrored version of the GE-1 craft appeared outside the window. 5, after we found Olsen's body in the airlock. 4, after it took Diane's. Wait, no, there were 4 after Diane's died, at 22:10. It's 22:43 and I only see 3 shards in there, sitting on her desk. But the door's locked, there's no sign of exit. Where did the 4th one go? Where did it go? Damn it, I don't know how much longer I'll be able to wait. I want to come home more than anything. See Melissa, see the little ones. That's exactly why I won't come back. It would be selfish. It wouldn't be right to let them live on Earth at the risk of these shards. Stop looking at me, both of you, stop it. What are you're not them, they're dead. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry for recording all of this. It would have been better not to know, wouldn't it? It would have been better not to know. Commander Tim Irwin, audio file 99, terminating recording at 22:45. After the audio ended, Dr. Parker and I sat quietly, not silently. I could hear my own heartbeat in the quaking canals of my ears. I could hear the project leader hyperventilating, failing to hide a murmur that sounded at the back of his throat. He'd already heard the 2 files, of course. I had no idea how he'd managed to maintain any semblance of professionalism. He knew what was coming. He knew what I was about to hear, but he said nothing, did nothing. I was crumbling from the haunting revelations in the last arriving recording of Commander Irwin. I hated Dr. Parker for involving me in the GE-1 program. Think about what we saw, the man eventually whispered. I looked at him without uttering a word, giving the scientist time to continue. Think about the body of Tim Irwin, Parker explained. What remained of it? I need, more than anything in the world, to hear file 102, the commander's final recording on Friday 17th, February 2023. That was after the GE-1 landed, I said. He shuddered. It wasn't the GE-1, Dr. Odell. You know that now. I'm thinking about the shards recovered from the wreckage. What happened to those? I asked, crippled by a fresh wave of terror. Dr. Parker lowered his head. Scientists are examining the fragments. Dr. Zealand's team. Now you've listened to the audio files. I'd like you to lend your expertise in his laboratory. Right, well, I've remembered something else, I said. The video footage from the dive. Do you remember seeing glass in GE-1's laboratory? I've hardly thought of anything else, he replied. Commander Irwin said in the final uncorrupted recording that only 3 shards remained, but there were more than 3 shards in that water, I quivered. Parker frowned. I don't know what to say to that, Earl. The shards could have shattered during the crash, split into numerous smaller fragments. I didn't believe that. Not from the description the commander had given. These were sturdy, unnatural things. Things which could change shape and state, not things that would shatter. Anyway, Dr. Odell, the scientist muttered, clearing his throat. Before we go to Zealand's lab, I'd like to ask for your opinion. GE-1 found no evidence of organic matter in the belt. Dr. Gian Diane's found no evidence of organic matter in the shard samples. Given the commander's description in file 99, however, do you think that the ship's data log may have been wrong? Do you think Dr. Diane's may have been wrong? I sighed. There isn't enough evidence for me to give a definite answer to that question, Dr. Parker. Not until I see the shards for myself. I regretted saying that. I didn't want to see the shards. I wanted to run away, wash my hands of the whole thing. File 99 had always filled me with a bottomless dread that I didn't realize a human body could experience. It haunted me. The thought of an unfeeling thing sealing one's form and then shredding that same person to pieces. The commander was right. It would be the worst imaginable thing for the substance to make its way back to Earth. But it was all over when the glass mimicked the spacecraft. The shards have already been here for a year. You're too late, Dr. Zealand said. That line snapped my mind into action. I had zoned out of the conversation earlier with the scientist, still trying desperately to process the horror of the past few days. It was nearly impossible to process something far beyond our world, something that the human mind has evolved not to process. Dr. Parker scoffed. Dr. Odell is too late, Zealand interrupted. We disposed of the shards this morning. I beg your pardon? I asked. The fragments were dangerous. The audio recordings made that abundantly clear. Dr. Long ordered us to destroy the samples, Dr. Zealand said. At that moment, Veronica Riding emerged from the lab, which was being barricaded by Dr. Zealand's hulking form. The sheepish woman was pushing a trolley of black waste bags, and she seemed to be avoiding detection. Regardless, hope sparked in my mind, as Veronica was a close friend of mine, not just a colleague. I hoped she would clear up the strangeness of the situation. The idea of NASA discarding such an important historical find seemed unthinkable to me. It was a lovely thought. There's no denying that. I wanted to entertain the possibility of the agency putting mankind's safety before mankind's progression, but I'm not a moron. Veronica, I called. Is it true? What was that, Dr. Odell? She asked. asked, stopping to face me. My body temperature lowered. As I eyed the face of my dear friend, I felt the shift. I didn't see a physical difference in Veronica's appearance as such. The shift in my fractured mind was more subtle than that. It was a feeling that whisked the contents of my gut. Veronica always called me Earl.